and then we'll open for a general discussion.
Thank you, Jose. Indeed, you are right. The first thing I would say is repeat Professor Moyer's advice: don't do this at home. Don't attempt it as a dissertation. Whether it's successful or not is yet to be seen once you read, and if you decide to read the book, to judge whether I'm successful in doing what I attempted to do. But what I was attempting is, as Professor Moyer says, not easy and should not be tried as a dissertation. It is the process, as Professor Moya said, of many years of thinking. It is actually the result of the story of the book. It very much points out why the characteristics of this book is the result, of course, of my own professional experience in many years of teaching, reading, living history, both in Mexico and the United States and other part of the world. And at some point I wanted to attempt this. I know it was risky, and as such it is not suitable for a monograph. As you notice, it's a collection of essays. It is not a chronological account of the city. It comes from my own, the first source of this book was my own city experience. And by experience I mean the living, existing, walking the cities. And the transformation of the cities I have seen over the many years I have as my sport, as my passion, is walking cities, about which I have written other things in Spanish. But I just love and like to walk cities and to live cities. And out of this experience I had a lot of ideas what to do with my own research as a historian, as a professional scholar. And that transformation that I had seen in the last 15 years in cities like Mexico City, Barcelona, Berlin, and another small city where I was born, and which has been radically transformed by migration and all sort of process, which is called La Piedad, Michoacán. Now very difficult place now, but and this transformation, this experience of the city, the experience of experiencing the emergence and growth, something that it's unknown to the history of the humankind, the megalopolis. You know, one thing is cities, and you are in New York, par excellence. You know, when we people who love cities talk about cities, of course New York and Paris comes to mind. Yes, and that's wonderful. But you know, megalopolis, that's another category of things. And I live, love, walked, and know one of the greatest megalopolis of the world, which is Mexico City. So I just fascinated by the walk. The experience was the first thing, and the first thing is the many years of walking, talking, and transcribing the human experience of the city, trying to transcribe in different forms, formats, and genera the experience of the city. So sometimes are essays, sometimes are funny things that come out of, and I have published in Spanish and other things. But you know, you who are professional students in PhD have read many of these famous people now, you know, Walter Benjamin, or you have read people like Marshall Berman, or you have read people like many of these people or famous that we now call theoreticians, or people who, as we use now the verb, theorized in English. In fact, they don't theorize anything, they just walk cities. And in trying to walk cities, they transcribe the experience of the city. And in transcribing that city, lots of things come from Simmel to Benjamin, or to Beatriz Arlo, or to Pessoa, or to Borges, or to whatever you mention, is that experience. The second thing that this book comes from out, in addition to the city experience, is my own many years of reading or trying to explain the how of history, the how to write history, how to transcribe the historical experience, language, and things like, it will sound very odd to you, about which I had written in Spanish, but I didn't, believe it or not, in addition to being boring professors, we do think in our free time, And in thinking about this, I think a lot about the relation of poetry with history. I'm not going to bore you about this, but I've been thinking about poetry and history. And what is the real nature, and how could I really characterize, after the many years of professional scholar, after the many years of teaching history, after the many years of writing history, how could I characterize the idea of the historical imagination? Something, as you know, imagination became lately a very nice and sexy term. Now we have imagined communities, the liberal imagination, the that imagination, imagine this, imagine that. And so I try to come out with the idea, what is the historical imagination? And I've been thinking a lot about this. But I've been thinking a lot about this, not in the, I didn't want to be one of those many very, very wise philosophers, thinkers, or people who theorize many complex things. Because after all, I consider myself, and I wanted to be a storyteller. I tell stories of the past, and I wanted to remain a teller of the past. So my ruminations on this book was, okay, I don't want to be one of those very wise people who keep writing books about how to write books, but never write books of history. You know, there are many books about, and there are experts on how to write history, how to write this, and never actually sit and write history. And so I wanted to come out after many years of thinking about this while writing history, at least publish a book in which all these two things could be together. The idea of thinking of how to do it at the same time that I'm doing it. With all the restrictions, all the limitations, all the problems that it has to face, the blank page. Evidence of the past, the blank page, and now I have to tell a story. And how do I do it? So I wanted to ruminate about that, and this book was my experience. The other important aspect was, of course, the idea of the city, both as a way to speak about, for instance, a nation, and also as a way not to speak about a nation. That is, the city, the history of cities, as a very comfortable, if you forgive me the word, way for a historian to go beyond the nation as a historian. Because the city, by definition, like all the aspects I talk in the book, science, language, style, architecture, are very difficult to limit to the nation. By speaking about the city, as Thomas More used to say, the nature of the cities is such that once you know one, you know all of them. Because it's so universal, the phenomena, that it allows you to go beyond the narrow framework which we historians often use to write history, which is the nation. But at the same time, you don't necessarily have to go out. It's very beautiful. You have the archives, you have the experience. It's at the same time extremely Mexican, and it's at the same time not only Mexican. And so I like that, and I used to learn a lot about this. And finally, the experience of this book, I came to the United States to study my PhD in the late 1980s. And at that point, I noticed, both in Mexico and in the States, a very important historiography of cities, out of which I learned a lot. On the one hand, when I came to Stanford to do my PhD, there was the legacy of Richard Morse, if you remember, which was a great historian of cities, who wrote a very beautiful biography of Sao Paulo. And there was a school of them, and in Mexico, while I was there was a school organized by Alejandra Moreno Toscano and others, and they were writing the history of Mexico. And when I came to the States, I learned about, Vienna Film de Cifra, and I learned about Thomas Bender, and I read about Marshall Berman, all this historiography of cities, all these renaissance and reconsiderations of people, when I came to the States, this is when Walter Benjamin started to be sexy in English. People were reconsidering Pessoa or Borges in order to speak about cities. And And of course, I came from the tradition in which, reading Monsiváis or reading Beatriz Arlo or reading people who speak about cities was the way I grew up with. And so I also am a result of this transformation, and the book is very much the result of this transformation. And this story I can tell you is what explains you why the book is as it is. First of all, it's a history of Mexico City written by me, who, as you can notice, I'm not a native of the English language, and yet it's in English. All the story I have told you explains why it's in English. If you stop to think a little bit, not as an academic, because that Mauricio Tenorio from the University of Chicago comes here to speak about a book written in English. Well, what is new about that? That's the way it is. That's the way it ought to be. No, it's not the way it ought to be. It's not the way it is. I am, above all, a Spanish writer. I'm a writer of the Spanish language. That is my language. Why did I write that language, this book in English? Especially this book, if you were to look carefully, who is so careful about the use of language and so insisting, so strong about the idea that language is a very important thing in history. So if I am advancing such an idea, if I am supporting such an idea, how come I write in a language which I obviously do not inhabit as good as I do in Spanish? Well, it has to do all the story I told you. In order to really try to speak this, or to take advantage of the universality that cities allow you to have as a historical subject, inevitably you are tempted to write in the lingua franca, so that I can discuss with my Indian colleagues, my Japanese colleagues, my American colleagues, my French colleagues, whatever I need to talk, as I learn it from other cities and other historiographies, and the only language I could do it is in English. Second, it's also a way to, as a colleague of mine, a very important historian of Mexico City, Ariel Rodriguez Cures, told me, this is Tenorio controlling Tenorio. Why? If I were to write this piece in Spanish, my concern and my emphasis on the form and the importance of language might have defeated me. In the English language, trying to keep the evidence and the essay form and the possibilities of essaying alive, but in a language which is not really mine, allow me to really come with the tone of voice I wanted to reach. A tone of voice that is both provocative as an essay, suggestive as an essay, concern of the form as an essay, and yet profoundly boring, concerned with clarity, short sentences. This is what I want to say, and this is the evidence of what I'm saying. In Spanish, it would have been a lot harder, precisely because of my familiarity with the language. As I had done in many other ways, and many other people could say, yes, you got crazy in other essays in Spanish because you went all the way wishy-washy stuff and it doesn't really fly. And so that is also why it's in English. And that is also why the essays, these are not a monograph or collection of essays which speak about many things, like monuments, like architecture, like avenues, like rats, like lice, like swearing in the streets, like signs, like Washington or Japan or Istanbul or India.